How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Oliver Gonzalez here. And today let's going to now look at the height algorithm, the width and the height algorithm. So to now I can weave that history of how do we get here, especially with CSS, right? And create that narrative that is fact based, so we can now on that have a well understanding and eliminate an entire classes of issues in our life, especially related to CSS, right? So when you need to do this kind of stuff, in my case as a web developer, as a web UI developers, this is exactly what I want to dedicate my time and efforts. So understanding this aspect and also the another aspect in other areas, all right? So for example, in the back end, how to manage those kind of places and so on and so forth. But at least for this is just to now understand is the CSS. And also there are several couple other videos and notes and courses that is as a complement of the JavaScript, right? So right now it's with CSS in combination with HTML, and there are other videos that are for the HTML in JavaScript as well as React, right? So that's the entire reason of looking at this, and also by October I want to look at the course of TypeScript as well. So as a way to master this, period, as a way to understand this. Okay, so let's get into this. Here, so in this rendering logic model, we were described. I look at, in previous model we look at the fundamental of CSS, right? But now is at what are the ways, or what is the mechanism that now CSS use in order to rendering elements. Now the rendering logic. So first we looked at all browser has built-in styles known as the user style sheet, where this is the way how it describes how the elements will look like. And because this, at the early days on the web, each one of them has their own implementations. So designers now create this particularly CSS reset as a way to have a blank state in which now we can apply is the design to our web app. Okay, so because the way how you can also pass now data down to the CSS element is via inheritance, and there's some particularly text that actually do that, or some particular property that do that, most likely to text base, where you can now inherit the property from another from a pattern element. So the way how this particularly properties and especially the CSS rules, the competing CSS rules are now determined to be applied at the document is the CSS cascade. So this cascade is a way of how now these competing CSS definitions are going to be applied in the DOM. And they have now several tiers. You have now the important tiers. There is a very interesting article that describes that. So for example, here we are actually taking notes of that. The CSS tier that I very find that out quite important to understand. The cascade tier, all right, where they have is for important types rules. So whether it's transition, important, animations, and normal, okay, is for type rules, important types rule. Okay, transition, important animations, and normal. And the other tier is that the origin, where the rule was defined, whether it's on the website, the user, or the browser. The other tier is the specificity. It's right there. The specificity of this rule is, hey, inline, or is a layer, and this is something that is quite new, interesting, new in 2025. Okay, so hey, this is inline, or this is a layer, or this is based on it is ID, or it is class attribute in class in pseudo classes, or the tag. Okay, or the tag and pseudo elements. And this particular things we're going to put a practice here as we now describing here. So for example, the selector here, or the specificity of this, it falls now into this third tier, okay, which is the specificity rules. And the last tier is the position, right? The order in which the rule was defined. The order in which the rule was defined. So if two competing rules now are defined as one, and then next to it, right below the another, the last one will be applied. This might be something silly to understand that, but it's again, it is still, to me, it is still relevant to at least understand if you have the time and the curiosity. But it's important to understand how these things work. How the things work, so we can now understand is this particular nuance that happens in the language. All right. So for example, how now two competed elements are, or how two competing CSS rules and definitions now are applied into the DOM. So we don't need to, for example, describe that padding left and padding bottom actually when they put right below, they're gonna override. You just know this for a fact. So this is the different tiers in which now these competing rules. So this is the algorithm to determine how these competing CSS rules are gonna be applied into the DOM. Okay, so it is based on it is important rules. Okay, transition, something we're gonna see that later. So transition, based on it is important rules. The transition, the importance, the animations, and the normal rules. Where it was defined, whether it's by user, whether it's by the website, the user, or the browser. The specificity of that rules, all right? Whether it's the inline or layer, or the ID attribute or pseudo class, or the ID, the ID, or the class attribute or pseudo class, or whether it's by a tag, like in this case, whether it's by a tag or a pseudo elements. So this is the specificity of this. And then the order in which this was defined. So we also described that the importance of how our contents needs to be organized, or the direction of this content, what it needs to describe how this is going to look like, whether it's inline or block, and what the inline and block mean. All right, which follow is the character next to each other. This is the way of how we read the content inline, and the block is all of these different words that forms blocks of text or paragraph. So they stack each other's, and because now as the web now evolves as the web evolved to provide now content to different cultures, how this positions directions, it doesn't makes, or it makes quite hard to maintain. So in order to now provide content, this internationalization content, we use now the logical property, which described is based on these two concepts of the inline and the block directions. So this is a way to how now these boxes, which is the way how CSS look at the content by wrapping them into several layers in order to calculate the position and the geometry of these elements based on a layout algorithm that is something that is defined by the browser. I think it is. That's interesting. That's a very good question. Is the CSS, is the layout algorithm defined by CSS or the browser? What do you think? Well, the implementation detail is so the implementation detail will be, so the browser will go with implementation details, but the spec must describe is the CS is must be described by the CSS. Exactly. The layout algorithm primarily is defined by the CSS specification but implemented by browsers. So my intuition was right. So how can I look at that? Can you point me to where exactly? Can you point me where, in which part of the doc, of the spec, describe this? Visual formatting model layout algorithm. Visual formatting model here. CSS 2.1 chapter 9 visual formatting model. This chapter describe the core algorithm. In the visual formatting model, each element in the document tree generates 0 or more boxes according to the box model. The layout of these boxes is governed by box dimension and type. Position schemes, normal flow, which is what we are doing, what we're looking right now, the flow layout or the normal flow, float, and absolute positioning, relationship between elements in the document tree, and external information. Viewport size, intrinsic dimension, and image. Key section include box generation and how elements create boxes, and positioning schemes, normal float and absolute positioning algorithm, block formatting context, and inline formatting context. Modern layer specs for newer layer algorithm, you will find them in dedicating spec, flexbox, grid, and positioned layout. Interesting. So their relationship, the visual formatting model does not specify all aspects of formatting, and conforming using agents may behave different from those formatting issues. not covered by the spec visual formatting model, which is why browsers implement this algorithm while CSS define the rules and expected behaviors. So CSS say this is the rules and this is the expected behavior. It is up to you how you're going to implement that, right? Note, several sections of this spec has been updated by other spec. See the cascading style sheet, the official definition. Visual formatting model. In the latest CSS snapshot, for a list specification of the sections they replace. The CSS working group is also developing the CSS level 2 revision of this cascading style sheet level 2 revision spec. Okay. Cascading style sheet level 2 revision. And again, this is a working draft. Okay. But here's where describing is this introduction to the visual formatting model. This chapter and the next describe the visual formatting model and how user agents process the document tree for visual media. For visual media, and when they say media, for visual media. Recognize media type, braille, embossed, handed, print, projection, screen, speech, TTE. Okay, but again, this is for the spec. And one thing is what the spec says, and the other is actually the implementation here. Braille, visual audio speech, and embossed and handled. Interesting. Okay, again, let's stick to what is relevant for this. Okay, so the visual formatting model, each element in the document tree generates 0 or more boxes according to the box model. The layout of these boxes is governed by the box dimension and type, position schemes, relation between elements in the document tree, and external information, viewport size, intrinsic dimension of image, etc. The properties defined in this chapter and the next apply to both continuous media and page media. However, the means of the continuous media or page. Okay. CSS defines the following media groups: continuous or page, visual audio speech or tactile, and grid or bitmap for character grid device, and interactive or static, and all. However, meanings of the margin property vary when applied to page media. The page model. The visual formatting model does not specify all aspects of formatting. It does not specify a letter spacing algorithm. Confirming user agent may behave differently for those formatting issues not covered in this spec. But again, it's because this is the visual formatting model, or how users agents process the document tree for visual media. In this visual formatting model, each element in the document tree generates 0 or more boxes according to the box model. And the layout of these boxes is governed by the box dimension, which is describing is now the box here, the content, the pattern, the border, and the margin, which is transparent. Okay, this particular box dimensions. All right. type, okay, which can be is either a block element or an inline level element in inline boxes, which is controlling box generation, run in boxes, and the display property here, and the position schemes. This value causes an element to generate a block box. This value causes an element to generate an inline level block container, an inline list item. This value causes an element, the HTML, to generate a principal block box and a marker box. For information about the list element or list formatting, please consult the section on list and none. Right? And the other is a table as well. Inline table, row table, and table column. But most of the time we don't use the list item. We use the block and the inline in order to position that. Okay. And the other is position schemes, floats, and absolute positioning. So now it's starting to make a lot of sense here of where the things come from, and in order to determine the position, in order to determine, because this, what it does is to determine is how agents process the document tree for visual media. In the visual formatting model, each element in the document tree generates 0 or more boxes according to the box model. So this is of how now, so this describe is how this elements from the DOM generates 1 or more boxes according to the box model, and is describing that. So by looking at the box model, which is the way of now how CSS sees or describe how browsers should process is DOM elements into visual elements, okay, as a box, where this box is made of the content, the padding, the border, and the margin. And the padding is the fluffy content that you pass here. We can use this now some shortcuts to expand that. To expand is the padding around the content, okay, and some of the examples that we can go with. The border, which unlike padding, is as a specific set of definition. We have a specific set of values that we can pass that by default is the line style. All right. We can pass is the width style, the width, the border width, the border style, and the color. And since we can now provide here margins to this box via the border radius top left right now, okay, this in contrast with some another property called outline, they are not the same, because border is including in the computation where outline does not, and outline it is being used now in focus inputs, right? So it makes quite a lot of sense here to see how now is the spec of the CSS that describe that. Interesting. The spec describe is the visual formatting of DOM elements, and this is the rules and the expected output. It is up to the browser implementations how to do that. Okay. This is why we have now this inconsistency in our thinking, and it's because similar that ECMAScript has now is a specific and a spec. All right. The same. The saying is for the CSS. Since now the ECMAScript handle is the logic. Uh, yeah, it's the logic. It's a series of step. It's the logic. So since now JavaScript describe is the logic here, CSS describe is the visual formatting, is how this element is gonna look like. Okay, and HTML describe is the structure of this. I know that it might sound quite silly, but when you truly understand that, it's like it makes a lot of sense. And in order to understand that, you need to create your own path, man. I don't think this is about practice. I think this is about is do you have the desire to understand this? This is one. And if the desire is there, the how will come up. The how will come up. That's what happened. If the desire is there, the how will come up. Okay. Okay. So now as we look at the border and also the margin, and how in margin has now specific it follows the same shorthands as the padding, but it has now different behaviors here. All right, especially that we can now apply is negative margins and the outer margins as a way to now center elements here. Okay, there are also some another feature property in the margins, but since now the CSS describe is this set of so because the CSS describe now this set of, since the CSS describe is this set of visual formatting, okay, how the browser should and how the browser should process DOM into visual elements by wrapping them into a box. Okay, so the layout of these boxes is governed by this. So because with this box size, with this box model is the way, so with this box model describe is now how browsers should treat DOM elements. Each one of those each one of those boxes are governed by layouts. So the layout of these boxes are governed by so the layout, so the layout of these boxes are governed by these layout modes or the layout algorithm, whether it is the normal flow. Okay, so whether it is the normal flow, the position layout, the flexbox, the grid, and the flow layout, the normal layout. But in this case, so here we're gonna focus is on the flow layout. Okay. Okay, but now it makes a lot of sense because it's the CSS that describe is these rules. Okay, okay. So it's CSS that describe is these rules of how now the user agents should so how the user agents should treat, technically speaking here, is that how the user agents uh, process DOM elements for visual medias. For visual media. All right. One of the most important features of style sheet is that they specify how a document is to be present on different media. One of the most important features of style sheet is that it specifies how document is to be present on different media, on the screen, on paper, with speech synthesizer, with braille device, etc. Holy moly. So how this should look like. So style sheet, one of the most important feature is that they specify how the document is to be presented on different media, whether it's on a screen, which is what we are most familiar with, or on paper, print media, even on a speech synthesizer. Interesting. Speech synthesizers. I am not quite familiar to this. Speech synthesis, artificial production of human speech. Speech synthesizers. Holy moly. Okay.
SJ snabbtåg 540 mot Norrköping, Stockholm med avgångstid 17.03 inkommer strax till spår 2. SJ snabbtåg 540 mot Norrköping.
Okay. Speech synthesis is the artificial production of human speech. A computer system used for this purpose is called speech synthesizers. This is a different media. Text to speech. Okay. Text to a speech. Computer and speech synthesizers. In 1999. California. Stephen. Speech synthesizers. Okay. At the Bell Labs Murray Hill facility, Clark was so impressed by the demonstration that he used in the climatic scenes of his screenplay for his novel 2001 Space Odyssey, where the HAL 9000 computer sings the same song as astronaut Dave Bowman. Put it to sleep. And Arthur C. Clarke was an English science fiction writer, and futurist, inventor, undersea explorer, and television series host. But I think he also went to war. That's what happened. During the Second World War, from 1949 to 1945, he served in the Royal Air Force as a radar specialist and was involved in the early warning radar defense system, which controlled the RAF success during the Battle of Britain. Clark spent most of his wartime service working on ground control approach radar, as documented in the seminar. But it's interesting that what he did. After the war, he obtained a first-class degree in mathematics and physics from King's College London. I get it. After this, he worked as assistant editor in Physics Abstract. Clark served as president in the British Interplanetary Society from 1946 to 47. Mhm. His his 95 his 1951 book, The Exploration of Space, was used by rocket pioneer Wernher von Braun. Was used by rocket pioneer to convince President John F. Kennedy that it was possible to go to the moon. Following to 1968 release of 2001, Claire became much in demand as a conglomerate of science and technology, especially at the time of Apollo space program. Clark lived in Sri Lanka from 1951 until his death. First in Onawatuwa, what the hell, of South Coast, and then in Colombo. Initially, he and his friends Mike Wilson traveled around Sri Lanka, diving in the coral waters around the coast with the Beachcombers Club. In 1957, during the so he lived in Sri Lanka. What the French stuff? In Sri Lanka, a 22-year-old American divorced with a young son. They separated permanently after 6 months. Although the divorce was not finalized until 1964, the marriage was incompatible from the beginning, said Clark. Marilyn never remarried and died in 1999. Claire also never remarried, but close to Sri Lankan men, one Claire called his only perfect friends of a lifetime. In the dedication of his novel, The Fountain of Paradise, Clark is buried with Enaki, who preceded him by 3 decades. In Canada Cemetery, Colombo main burial ground and crematory. In his biography, Stanley Kubrick, John Baxter cites Clark's homosexuality as a reason why he relocated, due to more tolerant law with regards to homosexuality in Sri Lanka. In knighthood, Clark earned his office in Sri Lanka in 2005. Holy hell, in Sri Lanka, bro. With a Mac. Holy moly. With a Mac, bro. Science fiction, science adventure books. Star King. Okay, The Sentinel. The Big Three. And a Space Odyssey. So in other words,
with that movie 2001, you're projecting us into the 21st century. I brought along my son Jonathan, who in the year 2001 will be the same age as I am now. Maybe he will be better adjusted to this kind of world that you're trying to portray.
The big difference when he grows up, in fact, if we wanted to wait for the year 2001, is that he will have in his own house, not a computer as big as this, but at least a console through which he can talk to his friendly local computer and get all the information he needs for his everyday life, like his bank statements, his theater reservations, all the information you need in the course of living in a complex modern society. This will be in a compact form in his own house. He'll have a television screen like these here, and a keyboard, and he'll talk to the computer, get information from it, and he'll take it as much for granted as we take the telephone.
I wonder though, what sort of a life would it be like in social terms? I mean, if our whole life is built around the computer, do we become a computer-dependent society and computer-dependent individuals?
In some ways, but they'll also enrich our society because it'll make it possible for us to live really anywhere we like. Any businessman, any executive could live almost anywhere on Earth and still do his business through a device like this.
Exactly. You still doing your business through a device like this, man. Which is exactly what I'm actually recording this series of videos in improving this my understanding on something that it is there, it exists. I'm not inventing or reinventing the wheel, and I'm providing my service and I'm doing my business to somebody else. In this case, well, for a company that actually make me to create a prototype for or a POC for an Apple, right? From a famous airline company, right?
And this is a wonderful thing. It means we wanted to be stuck in cities, we better live out in the country or wherever we please, and still carry on complete interaction with human beings as well as with other computers.
Yeah, but they come with other challenge as well. They come with other challenge as well. He talk about the benefits and not but in any case, that is quite revealing. That is quite mind-bending here. Absolutely, absolutely. And it all turns out to speech synthesis, but it's based on the media. Because one of the most important features of the style sheet is that how how a document is present in different media, bro. So how this particularly DOM is present in different media. Most likely we are used to the screens, but it can be print media. It can be now speech synthesizers, or what Brightly device. That is mind blowing. That is mind bending. I don't think they actually indeed I don't think indeed they cover that. CSS media query. Or the CSS add rules. So CSS add rules instruct CSS how to behave. They instruct its behaviors of CSS. So okay, they instruct its behaviors. Hey, this is the char set, an algorithm that has a syntactic format that add rule, but is a definition that determines the fallback characters is used to style sheet. The import tells the CSS engine to include this external, how this must behave. The layer defines the order of precedence, the namespace, the counter style, the container, font face, define font resource location, both local and external, along with style characteristic for when those resources are used with a declared font family. Keyframes. Hey, this is how you go to describing is the CSS. Layer, the media, scope, supports, and view transition. And again, this is the most common one. Specify the aspect of a page to be printed, such as dimension, orientation, and margins. A conditional group rules that apply if the content if the device meets the criterion of device using media query. And similar for page. Hey, this is how it should look like. Target all pages. Targets all even 100 number of pages. Okay, shit. Interesting. So by exploring of the media here, all right, especially that the visual formatting model tells how users process documents for visual media, whether it is screen, print, or even speech synthesizers. That's quite interesting. Holy hell. Welcome to the rabbit hole of this. Welcome to the rabbit hole of this. So because Jesus. Okay. Welcome to the rabbit hole. So one of the most important features of the CSS style sheet is that it describes how the document should be present on different medias. Okay, how the documents how a document is present on different medias, whether it's a screen, whether it's print, whether it's a speech synthesizers, braille device, and so on and so forth. Holy moly! So because this media types is the places of how you can this is the places, right, of how you can present this document in this format: the screen, the print, the screen, the print, or the speech synthesizers. But in our case, because we're getting hiring is for screens as a web developer, for screen, not for print media. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Okay. Now, this visual formatting describes how user process a document into a visual media, into this different ways of how a document can be represented. Whether it's a screen, usually it's a screen, or a paper, or a speech synthesizers. Yes, the spec actually describes that. But in our case, we care is in the visual formatting model, each element exactly in the visual media. So in the visual formatting model, here, I don't know if they describe here as a visual formatting model. What is a visual formatting model? Let me continue to read this. In the visual formatting model, which is a screen, each element in the document generates 0 or more boxes according to the box model. The layout of these boxes is governed by box dimensions and type, position schemes. So the layout of these boxes, which is how now a document generate is one or more boxes based on the visual formatting model. Okay. So these boxes are governed by these boxes are governed by layouts, known as the layout modes. These boxes are governed by layout algorithm, known as the layout boxes. So whether is this layout can be based on in this box dimension, this layout can be is normal flow, relative positioning. Okay, normal flow, float, absolute positioning. This is known as positional scheme. Okay, normal flow, floats, and absolute positioning. Interesting. Okay. Okay, normal flow, float, and absolute positioning. We also have is the flexible box and the grid. And the relationship between elements in the document tree and external information. Okay. So it makes a lot of sense. So I reached to this, the flow layer. And it's because now, since this is the way, okay, things started to make a lot of sense. So in the rendering logic that we look at this, what we describe is the user agent style sheets, and how now each one of them has their back in the old days, each one of them has their own look and feel of these different elements, DOM elements, okay? But as the right now browser has now stick to the law, all right. But despite that, there's some nuances that it is still relevant. This thing called CSS reset as a way to now those Kirk behaviors that happen across different browsers set ourselves in a blank state, in a common ground. Makes sense. Oh my god, makes a lot of sense. God. Oh fuck. Okay, so now because of this, right, this built-in declarations, because of this built-in declarations, right, and also that we can now pass, and also how this declaration now pass down to all the elements, okay, and affect how all of these elements should look like and behave. So for example, you can now inherit those properties. Usually it's a text base. So in order to resolve these competing style sheets that the user agents provide, the CSS has an algorithm which is known as a cascade, which say, hey, because now browsers by default have this common ground of how the elements should look, or how the elements looks like, in order to determine how competing CSS will apply, we use the cascade style sheets. Which is made of several of these tiers. So you have the important type rules. So for example, transitions, importance, animations, and normal rules. Okay. And then the location, right? If these style sheets are defined at website or at the user level or as a user agent, okay, or the browser, or if this now is defined is based on its specificity, okay. So inlines or layer or the ID or class, attribute or pseudo classes, or a tag like this, or a simple tag, right? A tag in a tag, or how do we call it? A tag or pseudo elements, right? Or in the last tier is the order in which was defined these particular rules. So this rules that describe is how the content is going to be read, okay. It uses now the inline and the block direction in order to describe this, the direction of the content. Where now, for internationalization purpose, we use this logical property, right? Instead of aligning elements via location, all right, we're going to align that is on how the content is being read, all right, whether it is left to right or right to left. So for example, in Arabic language, or hands-based characters from top down and then left to right, all right. So because of these differences, now we have this logical property that say, hey, how this content is, what is the direction of this content which is read? Oh, is this or that, let's gonna call that is inline. All right, and if several of these words create now a paragraph, let's gonna call this a block. It's gonna stack this and describe this as this direction, right? So this is the way of how CSS describe how these elements, how the content is going to be present. And because it describes how the content is being present, which is one of the most important features of CSS, is that how these DOM elements, how these documents should be present in different medias, whether it's on a screen or a print or speech synthesizers, among others. In our case, the visual formatting describe now how the browser should treat the document and present that by creating its boxes, one or more multiple boxes for these elements. And these boxes are governed by layout algorithms. Layout algorithms that it can be is position, float, and so on and so forth. Holy moly, bro. Okay. So, because the default layout is the flow layout, which is made of this type of elements, right? You have now block elements and inline elements. So now it's starting to make a lot of sense how these things is going to work. That'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.